Welcome to OTR, a friendly debate.
A friendly micro debate.
Yeah, this is a mini one.
Yeah.
Right?
It's the show where lawyers debate the most minutia, the smallest topics we can find.
The miniatures.
The minis, yes. We're coming to you from Birch Road Cellar in Lincoln Park, a fine establishment. And off-premise, the liquor store across the street has been kind enough. I think Bottle Shop is maybe liquor store on the other side.
Yeah, no, they're very
has
classy,
furnished us
actually.
with alcohol that we bought. No sponsors yet. Anyway, so what do we have on the menu for today? We're talking about the least of us?
The least.
I think it's the least of us.
Right.
Could be.
The Last of Us. Part
So
1
that's what?
and 2.
So I've seen the show.
I've seen 2 episodes of the shows as well.
Third one's airing tonight.
Yep.
So.
Super excited about
You gonna
that.
watch that?
So you'll see this in a week.
Yes.
Or two.
You'll see it when this show's probably over.
Yeah.
So
we'll
we'll just voice over the 5th episode's coming out.
Insert episode here.
Yeah, so we have our debaters, right? Mucci, you're going to be debating part 2 of the episode?
Part 2 of the Last of Us Part 2.
Right.
Better
The video
than
game.
Part 1, I think.
Yes. Mucci, I gotta say I'm very, very jealous because part 2, in my opinion, is my favorite of the series. But I am always up for a challenge, so I'm really excited to dive in and debate part 1 with you.
I thought you were just going to say, like, Mucci, I got to say, you're wrong.
No.
Do we need to actually introduce Andy? Is this his first time around
This
the
is his
camera?
first time.
Yeah.
So
on the live stream.
I'm
This is
Andy.
super producer Andy.
I am a producer. I'm not a lawyer by any means, so don't come to me for legal advice.
Don't
I
come
mean,
to
we
us.
say that anyway.
Don't come to them
Fine,
either
that's
because you've got 3 different areas of law, and
None of them are
honestly,
And he was on our live stream. You would have seen him on the live stream for a little bit.
Yeah.
I set up the live stream and
Burning.
I moderated the chat. So,
Moderated the shit out of that chat.
oh, thank you very much.
There you go.
But yeah, I'm very excited to be here on this little mini debate. So,
Your intro to the debate.
yes.
So the way we're going to structure this debate conversation today, I don't know how antagonistic we're feeling, but each of you is going to get a chance to do your opening. Then we're going to have some questions from there, give each of you a chance to answer it, and then we'll render a verdict. But this one's unusual because you're judging this too, right?
Yeah, it's the 2 of us.
Yeah. So we could have a split decision here,
2 of us were
and
the Last of Us.
then we might have to rely on our commissioner to break the tie. Derek behind the camera.
Front of the bod.
So anyway, Andy, do you want to jump into your opening?
Let's keep it brief.
Okay, I will keep it as brief as I can. I think that Last of Us Part 1 is probably the best game in the series in terms of how people look at the approachability of the game, the storytelling, and how simplistic yet how much room there is for character development, and the overall science that's involved into the storytelling, depicting a world that is ended and overtaken by nature again. That would be my opinion.
Okay.
All right. And
Strong start with Mucci already agreeing with your opening.
we love to see it.
So, I think that Part 2 has a better structure and a better method of telling its story than Part 1 does. And there's a reason I think that Part 1 translates very well into a TV series, and it's because it feels kind of like a TV series when you're playing it. It's very straightforward. You progress through the story in a very linear fashion. Whereas Part 2 takes this approach of, it does a couple things that are very interesting, I think, and very unique to gaming, I think. One is that it, without getting into spoilers, it has a kind of cyclical structure. It mostly takes you over a span of a couple days, or a few days, and then has you redo those days as a different character. And that character you play in those subsequent 3 days is sort of the antagonist of the game. Is a character that up to that point you have hated. And if the game is successful for you or not is one thing. And for a lot of people that hate it online, it's not successful for them. Or they just read it before the leaks before it came out and decided beforehand. But it makes you play as this character, and by the nature of playing games, you kind of are forced to identify with the character because you want to see the rest of the story. You don't want them to die. You've hated this character for probably very valid reasons, but you start to see in the storytelling some backstory for why they did what they did, but also in playing as that character, you start to, I think by the nature of games, identify with them. And that's why I think the structure of part 2 is like way more interesting. And it gets also in a way that is very unique to games, the sort of nature of violence. I mean, it's a violent video game where you have to kill the zombies, but you also have to kill a bunch of people who are not zombies. And they really hammer home what you are doing and how devastating it is. Because you will kill somebody, and their friend will go, "Alex, where are you? Alex? Alex, no!" Like, it does it enough times that it's almost comical at a certain point, but it still is like, oh, you killed someone with a name who has friends and a family.
You humanize them.
Yeah, you humanize them.
Before you kill them.
After you kill them, actually. In your quest for revenge, you are forced to sort of reckon with the destruction you are wreaking, and then you switch to the other character that you probably hate at that point, and are seeing their side of things, and the people they're losing because of the character you're playing before, and their quest for revenge. So I think it does something so interesting and unique that I think only a video game can really do. I'm really curious how they're going to adapt it in season 2 of the show.
So let's talk about the origins of The Last of Us. All right, Andy, you want to talk to us about that?
Sure. I guess how I would like to intro this is, so The Last of Us Part 1 came out at a time where I think the height of storytelling in terms of like video games was starting to come to sort of like a, what's the word? I don't want to say like fulcrum, but like kind of
Apex or like
Apex, yeah, like kind of like where it is in terms of the quality of games you see today.
Yeah.
And I would say like the main games that came out that year that were really, really impressive to me were BioShock Infinite, also Grand Theft Auto 5, and The Last of Us Part 1.
Grand Theft Auto 5 being, was that San Andreas?
No.
No.
That's,
No.
'Cause that's where I left off.
Yeah.
San Andreas.
No. It's Los Santos,
Oh, okay.
which is Los Angeles in a fictional world.
You get into the valley.
If Los Angeles was an island, because if you look at the map, it's literally
an
just
island,
an
yeah.
island.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like you were coming at a time where a lot of video games, like from like the 2000s, the stories were great, but I want to say this is like where everything kind of came to a head, where like, okay,
Acting, voice
video
acting.
games, like a lot of people that are movie critics, I know one critic in general was Roger Ebert.
Yeah,
He did not think that video games was considered art,
right.
which I love Roger Ebert. I think he's great,
But he's
but
dead
he's
wrong.
literally dead and wrong. So rest in
He
peace,
might have
Roger
eventually come
Ebert.
around though, like seeing
Yeah.
the way things are now.
I think that if
I'll have to ask his
he,
neighbor. I know. Right?
Oh, what?
I
Start for another time.
But I think the medium at the time was really, really pushing it in terms of stories and character development. Because before that, around the 2000s, a lot of the trend in video game was, okay, I need a good multiplayer game. Because that's when online play just started to come around. You know, you had Xbox Live,
Yeah.
you had PSN.
That was the focus. Yeah.
People were getting together, were playing like, you know, literally not just like split screen anymore. People were like, oh, I live on another side of the country and I don't get to see you that much anymore. So let's go play this like game where we like fight other people online all over the world, or play like Mario Kart online, whatever. But I think a lot of the time during that era, the single player experience was kind of going through a little bit of a challenge because, again, most people were drawn to multiplayer games.
Sure.
So for me,
Well,
really,
outside of like Halo.
yeah. Well, because like I loved Halo, like Halo and Call of Duty. Like I remember when Call of Duty 4 came out, like I was playing that constantly, like with friends online. But what I really loved was I saw the trailer for The Last of Us. I had an Xbox 360. I was tired of the multiplayer experience because most of the time when I was playing online, it was just a bunch of 5-year-olds screaming into the mic, or just like people that are like obscenely racist. Like I
How many
didn't.
children fucked your mom, Andy?
Or
At least so they claim.
say they claim it.
Isn't it still like that though? I feel like it's still kind of
It's
like
definitely still like that.
on Fortnite now.
and they're still 5 years old.
Yeah,
Shit,
somewhere around there.
we shut down the comment section.
Yeah, no. I mean, like, we can add on to the toxic gaming conversation a little bit later in this episode, but
We'll get there.
the thing that I really, really remember was I watched the trailer. It looked like nothing I've ever seen before in terms of, like, zombie games. And I've played zombie games. Like, I played Dead Rising. I played the Resident Evil games. But, you know, the thing about those was like, as much as I enjoyed the experience that Capcom has provided with Zombie Apocalypse, I was looking more for a story-driven game that had more emotional depth and more meaning to its characters. Neil Druckmann.
Sorry, Neil.
I know, poor guy.
They were
enemy
working.
of the pod.
He's not an enemy.
He's not an enemy of mine at all. Like,
No,
he's
no.
great.
Fantastic of you.
Fantastic.
So he was working on the game design for and the story and the direction of Uncharted 2, and there was this one level where it's pretty much like you and I think one of the villagers are going through this like Arctic tunnel, and you guys are like,
That part's hard.
wasn't there like a Yeti involved, right? There was like something about a Yeti, but like they were going through, and he was like, "Oh, I really like this because it's like, what's his name? Nathan Drake is sort of working together with somebody, and there's a lot of like really interesting like character like things that are happening in that."
Uncharted, has what Last of Us really does well is like the 2 characters or 3 characters like walking around like conversing with each other while you're playing, like not at a cutscene, but like as you are doing stuff, like as you're climbing, as you're like getting ready to go into a battle or something like that.
Yeah.
The people are communicating to you, and it feels much more immersive in that way.
Yeah.
For that reason.
And so Neil Druckmann took the idea of like, okay, so I'm using another character to rely on tasks like I need someone to boost me up. I need some of that. And just was like, okay, well, what if I had 2 people in the space and like created sort of a game that involves just 2 characters. And then finally, the thing that really hit the nail in the coffin for creating this game was Neil Druckmann was watching this BBC documentary called Planet Earth. I'm pretty sure you all are familiar with it. It's a very popular series on Netflix. There's an episode about this mushroom called the cordyceps fungus. Now, what the cordyceps fungus does in this documentary, it shows details of these ants that are like just kind of going about their day, like getting like leaves and supplies and stuff. But then you finally, coffee, And what ends up happening is they get infected by the spores of this plant. And what ultimately happens is the fungi take over the mind of the actual like ant. But the ant is still conscious of who they are, which I think is pretty fascinating.
How would we know that?
That's what the details of the
Do ants have consciousness?
I mean,
20 years of testing these.
What's it like to be a bat?
What is it like to be an ant?
There you go.
but the point is, it's a real fungus that essentially turns another species into what's considered like technically a zombie.
I think we've seen this concept before, right? I've definitely seen that concept explained with the ant, and it's got to be in like one of the zombie movies. Right?
Every zombie movie?
Yeah, probably every zombie movie.
I mean, mostly,
20
right?
days later, where they
Yeah.
run as fast as they did in The Last of Us.
Yeah. So
the runners.
with all of the
Left
elements,
4 Dead, Walking Dead,
yeah,
Running Dead,
with
Running Man.
Walking Dead spinoff.
So what's funny is like with all of the elements combined, Neil Druckmann was able to create the game in a way that you had the science of what the world would look like if nature took back the earth without human beings touching it. You had the story between 2 characters, a surrogate father and daughter after father had lost his daughter at the very beginning of the pandemic. And then you had sort of the build-up and tension in certain moments told throughout the entire story. So when it came out, it was so well received and received a ton of accolades. And that's why I think part 1 is very interesting, and I'm excited to dive in a little bit more and talk about it. So,
Now, Mucci, do you have something to tell us about where the state of things were when Part 2 came out, as opposed to, because I know Part 1 was remade, right? Did that happen before Part 2 came out?
No, actually. So Part 1 was remastered for the PS4 because it came out tail end of PS3's lifespan.
Yes.
And it was remastered in 2014 for PS4.
Yeah,
and then it was remade
originally.
It was remade as after Part 2 comes out because now it's called The Last of Us Part 1 for PS5 last year.
So a remaster and then a remake?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So then in between those is Part 2.
Yeah.
And Part 2.
Which version did you play?
The original?
The original version, but on PS4.
So
Okay.
remastered.
Yeah, so remastered.
Maybe it was
Which includes maybe Left Behind, which is like the DLC continuation that they're actually going to
Like I
implement
said,
this series.
I essentially played the first 10 minutes, is what I'm realizing.
Seems
So you've only played the first 10 minutes. I get it. Yeah.
So Last of Us Part 2, and I also tie in my history with gaming as well, or like my more recent history with gaming, if I can.
When did Part 2 come out?
2020.
2020.
So it came out like during the pandemic, and I was trying to get the exact month, but I was just in my research. I was seeing that
COVID a spores kind of thing? Did COVID come
from the
No.
cordyceps.
from the cordyceps? Can you tell us that much?
I don't know if the science backs that up. I don't think it has the same effect on people. I don't know if we'll see in 5 years people with like huge globs in their heads, like not able to.
Well, we've got bloaters walking around. That's for sure.
Anyway, that's for damn sure. No, so it comes out like
me at 8.
it comes out so during the first year of our pandemic, which even the developers had to work during part of the pandemic. I'm trying to get the exact month.
I think a lot of people had to work
June
during part of the
19th is when it
pandemic.
came out.
June 19, 2020?
2020,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, so it's okay.
So
Get into the
which
middle of it.
7 years about after the first game came out. So it's a long-awaited sequel. And part of what, the background of what happened as well is that there were leaks of the plot. And it is somewhat of a controversial plot in a few ways. And I kind of, teased that a little bit in I'm not going to get into spoiler country, but I kind of teased that a little bit. But it was leaked, and people that love the first game, evidently, or just trolls and haters is probably another part of this group, review bombed the game based off of the leak of what they saw was going to happen.
Spoiler alert as to what we're going to release after this.
We're going to talk about
We're
toxic
alluding to a
gaming
lot of
communities,
spoilers
toxic
that we are not.
communities.
Yeah, we can.
And I think gamers are among the most toxic communities, and it's still pretty badly review bombed on Metacritic because every other game has a critic score and a user score. I mean that's how Metacritic works, but every other game has a few, maybe a couple hundred people, users voting for it, right? This one has 100,000. It's clearly these are not just people making account after account just to give the game 1 star or 0 or whatever.
Imagine
So anyway,
being that mad online.
yeah, probably a lot of people that hadn't even played the game and didn't have that experience that I was describing, where you get the complicated emotions of having to play as a character that you hate, and maybe grow to identify with by playing as them. And I was not really gaming in 2020. I think Orlando was telling me and a few of our other friends, Maddie, everyone get a PS5, and I'm kind of I just don't really play video games anymore.
This is a big mistake on my part.
I also love that you just told everybody to get a PS5. They could just get a PS5 during the middle of a pandemic.
Before it came out.
It was definitely when it was
crazy.
super hard to get one. It still might be, right?
No, it's gotten a lot better. Supply chain has been a lot easier.
Yeah, it was when it was it was like a gamble, and it was you put all your eggs in one basket into some kind of lottery system or some kind of TikTok algorithm.
And you follow
maybe you get it, maybe you don't.
Because that was literally at the time when all of the semiconductors and stuff were getting bought out because they were either being used for crypto, like the graphics cards.
So
or,
The Last of Us 2 is a pandemic supply chain story.
I mean,
That's what I'm getting.
essentially, yeah. At one point, it was.
All right, so I think maybe we could start off by giving you a little preview of questions we want to ask you, and then you guys can go from there. Basically, we're hoping to learn a little bit more about the gameplay mechanics of the games, And maybe some differences there, and then also the story, structure, content, emotional feelings, that kind of thing. So.
Okay.
Andy, you led off with the opening, so do you want to take the lead here on, let's say, the gameplay?
Yeah, if you're okay with that, if you have
that's
no
okay with
objections.
I think
my
that's fine.
panelist.
Because I think it'll be good if Andy starts, because my point is just basically on refinements to the gameplay.
Sure.
Essentially.
Okay. So the gameplay mechanics is. Have you ever played the game Dead Space? The UI.
I think it just got remastered, though.
It did. I just started playing the remake of it recently, but
I never played it either. But.
The mechanics are kind of the same. It's very much survival horror. You're managing your resources, but also the way that you're doing it, it's live. So it's not just like you pause and you like equip like a certain item to your character. You're literally having to like take a minute and be like, hey, like there are like 5 different guys. I need to go to a safe area, go to my backpack, see what I actually have in inventory. And that adds to the dread of the situation.
So this is one of those games where you're like, man, I got 5 bullets. I need to figure out how I'm going to manage these 5 sacred bullets.
There's
tape.
Resident Evil, Valheim.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, but the thing that you really, really have to be careful of is where you're basically creating stuff. Because like it's not only just managing your inventory, but also you are scounging around for resources to craft items as well. So like
healing items.
Yeah, there's
Molotov
healing
cocktails. There's
Molotov,
like
shivs,
bombs.
and shivs have more than one purpose. Like shivs, you can like stab people instead of having to choke them out. Because if you choke them out, like it's a lot slower, and that gives more of an opportunity for other enemies to come across you, and you get discovered if you're trying to play stealthily. But if you use a shiv, it's just done, and then you like run away and you go hide somewhere. The shiv can also be used to unlock rooms in certain areas. So you're trying to figure out, it's like, okay, do I want to hold on to my shivs like to sneak into rooms, or do I want to use a shiv as like a last minute way to like escape and not get found?
Yeah.
So there's a prison simulator.
I mean, if you want to consider prison an open world in the apocalypse, yeah, I guess.
And so, right, you are looking around, like you'll find like cloth and a bottle of alcohol.
Yeah.
You combine those and you make a Molotov cocktail. Things
Yeah.
like that. Like
As a lot of games.
Yes,
Yeah.
but as you're grabbing this stuff, I feel like the animations are so good in the game. Like seeing like your character pull out the thing and make it, and like it takes a little bit of time. It's not automatic. You don't just press X and like boom, it's there. It's like
it takes
and then he
a
puts it away,
good
you know?
amount of time.
Just like that?
Yeah. So like for example, like let's say you're in a warehouse and you're surrounded by 5 different men who are like searching for your character. You only have enough like space within the map to go and do something without being seen.
Mm-hmm.
So it just adds a higher level of intensity to the gameplay and the immersive experience.
Is it just sneaking around though? I mean,
But
like
that's the
Metal
other
Gear
thing.
or-
There's more than one way to play this.
Yeah, you can go all out.
You can go guns out if you want, or you can play it smart and conserve resources, sneak around.
So we know Andy's strategy.
But also,
play it smart.
You also don't have to kill anyone in certain aspects.
Mm-hmm.
You could literally leave the map by sneaking around and leaving some enemies alive if you'd like to.
Yeah, you're not
It
really
sounds
going
a
to
lot like Metal Gear.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It is.
Because, I forget which one it is, but there's like a scene where all of the guards and stuff you've killed up to that point in the game, like there's ghosts coming on you.
Yeah.
Metal Gear Solid 3. We could talk a lot about Metal Gear Solid
What I-
at some point.
It's a fun mechanic. I like sneaking.
What I will say is the
Just an apple,
downside of it is the resource management is it's very much overdone as like normal horror survival games. So like you're spending a good majority of your time going into like rooms to search for items when that time could be used, maybe like expanding on the story. And they do try to balance it as best they can, because what you ultimately are doing is while you're finding items, you're also looking at journal pages from people that have like maybe sent letters or left
Comic
like
books.
notes, comic books.
Fucking Comic Books Rally.
They're like collectibles, things like that. But again, a lot of the
those help
game
for anything?
No,
No,
it's literally just like
there's sort of an interesting level in part 1 that I really like, and there's this level where you have to go into the sewers, and you actually see how like the people that have lived in the sewers, they built sort of a community, and the way that you can tell is by the atmosphere, but also there's these letters that are left behind from like the people who built a home within the sewers. They set up their own traps, things like that. And so it's kind of a way to kind of see how people sort of lived during those times. And the characters would have like sort of reactions too. And that was the other thing that was interesting.
It's like a supplement to the storyline.
Yeah.
Or just make it a little bit more in depth.
Exactly. So like there's other moments where like Ellie will literally look at something and there'll be a moment where like you can like interact with her and she'll
optionally.
Yeah,
it's like an optional
optionally.
dialogue thing.
The one example that I can think of is there's this part of town that they go into in Pittsburgh, and there's this picture of like this woman who looks very, very like frail, but like in the picture it was like the beauty standards of the time before the apocalypse happened. So like, you know, like a lot of people would have like photoshops, people would be like a little bit more skinnier, like there'd be like a whole like, it's kind of like with the Kardashians and their controversy of like body image, where they're talking about like, hey, like, you know, this is my routine for getting skinny and this is my routine for that. And Ellie's just sitting there and she's reacting and she's like, do people make themselves purposely like skinny on like just on purpose? Like that seems stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, yeah, it's just for looks. And it's like, well, that sounds dumb. Or like, there's this really.
But she was born afterwards, right?
She was born,
no, she was born literally like after it happened.
Yes.
But
like
it's
5
just
years after or so. Yeah,
it's things like that that make that level of immersion much more interesting, and it kind of advances the story in a way. So yeah, I would say the only downside of The Last of Us in general, like not just part 1 but part 2, is really the way that you go looking for resources is kind of
open drawer.
It's just open a drawer. If there's something there, it's not
Maybe
there.
some like I like that. I get it.
He's talking shit about part 2, so you should probably respond to this.
Well,
Or the
it's
same
also
problem.
to his own.
Yeah,
to his
I'm
own
talking
game,
shit about my own game too.
I will defend, I guess, both games. And maybe even part 2 is smoother in this regard. Of like, when you do that, the animations of like looking through, grabbing things, it's so smooth and quick, and I find it very satisfying to open and explore everything. And you're not just checking when you explore things in other games. A lot of times you're just checking things off a list, and yeah, you have those like journal entries and stuff, but those are usually easier to find, or like they just add spice to the story. But like, you're not really just finding things just to find them. You're finding things that you're going to use as resources going forward. So you're going to use this powder to combine with this thing and make a smoke bomb. You're going to use the alcohol and the cloth. You're going to use the shiv and maybe attach it to your melee weapon to make like a melee weapon with a shiv at the end of it. So like everything you gather is useful.
I'm assuming that you're like capped off in like the amount of space you have when you find things. You don't have like an unlimited.
No.
Resource management, inventory.
It is a pretty straightforward game. Yeah, there's no like resource management. There's no like, oh, I'm overburdened. I have to like drop this or anything like that. I mean, you may have like max
I
out
love to
certain
hoard
things.
so that's a big plus.
So you have like an unlimited like amount of space?
No, you have a limited amount of space.
But I don't think it's like I can't pick up this. I think it's like of a certain item. Like you have too many cloths, so you can't pick up another cloth. But I don't think having a lot of cloths means you can't pick up a bottle.
But I guess like my argument to that is, so
is it different from part 1 and 2?
What I will say is, overall, in terms of gathering supplies, it's not the same as like a game like, let's say, like Final Fantasy or like Kingdom Hearts, right?
So is it the same between the 2 games then?
Yes.
It's the same between the 2 games, but when I'm talking about the specific aspect of trying to find items, to me is very mundane, and I know that sounds like a really weird argument to make for a video game, but like when I think about trying to get an item, right, it's something that I actually want. Like, for example, like in Kingdom Hearts, there are literally like side quests that you go through to get a Keyblade, to synthesize a Keyblade. Like, it's not like that in The Last of Us. Where The Last of Us, it's like, yes, like, I'm gathering supplies, pretty much to the similar vein of, like, Resident Evil. I go in, I check a room, I see if anything's there. If nothing's there, I move on. And there's so much detail to the space that I wish there was more of a unique way to grab items and interact and just live in that space. Look, I appreciate.
Settle down, maybe find a wife.
Abandon the.
No, but like I
Swap a certain
appreciate.
place.
What I appreciate is
Until
like
legally it's yours.
Put out some roots. Open
Sure,
inventories.
like Fable, right, or Skyrim. Like you can literally have your own house, but
Loved Fable.
yeah. But like when you look at Fable, right, you think like, okay, resource management is a little bit different because like in Fable, like okay, it's not the end of the world per se, but it's like I literally have the choice to like buy a home. I kind of
You
would
find
like
your wife, and then if you do certain
stuff
things,
like that,
your wife
Yeah.
leaves.
or if you're a female character, find a husband.
you can't find a wife.
Or whatever.
I want to jump to. I want to jump to a point.
Jump to it.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Talk about
So
the
you were talking about, is it like an open space, right, or is it? It is pretty linear.
Yeah.
But 2 is a little bit less linear in. I think that the locations are bigger, so that you can kind of explore them more, and so there's more like sort of optional areas, quote unquote, and there's more that you can do to like decide how you want to tackle the situation of the enemies you're facing. The other difference about Part 2 is in both games you have you can upgrade your weapons, you upgrade your guns, and you find like parts, and you go to a workbench and you upgrade them. In Part 2, I'm not a gun guy by any means, but that animation is so satisfying when you like add a silencer on your pistol, and it shows, or whatever upgrade, and it shows the entire thing like sped up a bit, but like still takes its time to add the detail of how would you like make this like silencer, or how would you like add this thing to your weapon.
It's
So-
stick a potato on the end of your gun.
Part 2, though, you say it's open world, but really
No, it's not open world, but it's like the spaces are bigger and more.
they're bigger. I would say the only thing that's open world more about Part 2 is Seattle, like the first day. But
So you go through multiple cities.
You go through way more cities in Part 1.
in
Oh,
Part
I will
1,
say.
you go through Boston,
It's more of a
Pittsburgh, Jackson,
trouble.
a college that's in some university in Wyoming. Then you go to Utah. So it's like 5 different cities. But actually in Part 2, I would argue you're only in Jackson and then it's Seattle.
So, and then at the very end,
in Part 1, you see more of America. Like, Part 1 is basically like a road trip at the end of the world.
no, it is.
And that's what's kind of interesting to me. Like, and you kind of see the aspect of like how people live in certain areas of the United States during a time of the apocalypse.
Getting a little into the story here, but before we get into the story, let's one more thing about the gameplay Part 2, and I'll move on. That is better than Part 1. You have a fucking jump button in Part 2. You can't jump in Part 1.
Yeah, well, okay.
You can't jump.
Come on, when I walk in a game like that, I'm just constantly jumping.
Always jump in
You
Part 1?
can't jump in Part 1 and you can't crawl down in Part 1.
Patrick, can we have a sidebar here?
Can we call this?
You can't jump?
Are you gonna... So you're gonna call that right now based off a jump mechanic?
Yeah, video game.
I'm sorry.
You're fighting people.
Super Mario Brothers, that's all you do.
I'm sorry, but are you gonna jump when somebody's gonna shoot you midair? That makes you an open target.
If you need to.
Can you like roll or straight?
So,
We'll go. No, let's
no, I want to talk about this right now.
Whoa!
Can you dodge or roll?
I think in Part... I can't remember.
Part
I think
1 you
Part 2
can't.
You can roll in Part 2.
No, Part 1.
This is
No, you
part,
dive, by the way.
part 2 you can dive. Part 1 it's you crouch behind objects. That's what you have to do.
So gameplay Part 2.
I think you know what? I think they're probably still at an even keel here because Mucci buried the lead. First of all, that's on him. So I think they're still even because you should have led with that.
It's not the first thing you think about, but funnily enough,
That's your opening.
the studio that came out with Crash Bandicoot took to the second game in the series to make a jump button for whatever reason.
Jack and
That's
Daxter.
a low
They were
blow.
actually
That's a
playing.
low blow, dude.
right, let's go to storyline.
I know to make a jump button.
All right. Storyline.
Storyline. We want to start with part one.
Part one.
Let's
It's
to
what
limit
the
it to the
Yeah.
storyline.
So.
How emotional does part one get?
Oh.
Are we
it's-
jerking tears?
Literally,
Little
the
tearjerker.
opening scene is you trying to bring your daughter, who has a broken leg, to safety, and then she immediately gets assassinated by the U.S. government because the U.S. government thinks that you're infected. And you are literally holding your daughter in your arms, trying to say, it's okay, you're going to be fine, but she's already passed away. That is literally the fucking opening of the game. The game, you play as the daughter in the very beginning, and you see her point of view of how she views her family life, like her with her dad and her uncle.
I haven't played it, but I think you start off playing as her, right?
Yes.
That's how
Yeah.
you start the
Yeah,
game.
you literally
So,
start
like,
out the game
So I
as
think
her.
she's the player character.
Without
Yeah.
knowing like what's going on. If you first play this game and you don't know anything about this series, you're playing as this character,
Yes.
and then are you her when you get killed?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, no, you're not her.
Cutscene,
You're not her when you get killed because what happens is.
And then you wish you had a
She
jump
gets-
button to get out of the way.
All right. There's a jump button in part 2. Can we bury that? Listen, I think what I really liked about part 1 in terms of story is, yes, it's very linear, but like I said, the story is so laid out simply that they spend a lot of the time in between the space focusing on the actual character development.
Okay.
And the growth of the character.
As a first lead into this franchise that will
Yes.
Now, do you think, like, obviously you said there's the actions of, like, foraging and stuff, and that advances the plot, but are these emotional elements told, like, mainly through cutscenes, or are they playable,
They're
or is it
told through both.
action time,
There's-
whatever the hell they are, where you have to, like, press the buttons in time?
So there's both cutscenes.
Yeah.
There's both through the action of the gameplay. There's
Are the cutscenes skippable? Back about mechanics?
I don't think they are.
They probably aren't in both, but
They-
they might be.
they
for
might be.
speedrunners or something.
They might be, but what I'm telling you
I
is
think
these
they
are
are.
scenes that you don't want to skip
Okay.
because of the emotional weight and the importance. Even what I found going back and playing the games over and over again is I never skip the cutscenes because I think they're some of the most like beautiful, like well acted,
Oh yeah.
like scenes. Like the actors.
Did you play it when it first came out? The first.
Oh yeah,
First
Yeah, that's
version?
what he was saying.
Did it still hit as hard? Like,
Oh,
was it,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
It
It was well
hits
developed
hard.
at the start. I think.
every time I go back and play that game, if you do not like
So it's not the graphic. It's not any of that. It's purely the storyline.
the
It's
story itself is what's really powerful, and the fact that Naughty Dog really invested in the actors and like the process of like telling the story through the actor's perspective. Neil Druckmann was very much a collaborator of like, hey, you have the character. I kind of want it in a certain way. I'll let you know when a scene's coming up and when you need to prepare for it, but I want you to do what you will because I know you're going to tell the story to the best of the ability. What I really love about Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson is Troy Baker, one, when you look at Troy Baker as
Who are these people?
they're the voice actors. So
Okay.
Troy Baker plays Joel, and Ashley
He's
Baker.
the main guy,
sorry, not Ashley
dad
Baker.
with the...
Yeah, he's the main guy. And then
That's how it plays in the
there's
show.
and then there's Ashley Johnson, who plays Ellie. When you look at the actor who plays Joel, he's this tall, skinny dude. Like you would not imagine this like burly, gruff, like I've seen some shit man. Like he comes into the audition, he's like super friendly, but then immediately switches on, and he does like the voice. Neil Druckmann like was not sure at first if that was going to be who he would cast as Joel, but then like as soon as he went into the voice, like literally the voice is like Joel has seen some shit. That was the character description, and he is already like in character.
Well, and that's what you noted a little bit as
Yeah.
well. But like, it's not just like
Yeah.
it's all animated and they're voicing it over. It's completely motion captured. You get the emotions on
Mocap.
their face. You get the emotions of their movement
Yes.
and what they're doing. It's acting. It's really acting.
So did that
let's put
change
it
or
in
improve at all when they did?
For part 2, what are we expecting in part 2?
I think it'd be hard to improve on that, but I wouldn't say anything like in terms of like the
Same
acting is better in
characters?
part 2. It's a lot of the same characters, yeah. So it's
Okay.
hard to really say that. But new characters, and I can't get into spoilers, so
Yeah.
we'll stop it there.
So-
But,
So what I will say for the series, like overall, at least in part 1, is part 1 is one of the games where women are not sexualized in gaming. You
Yeah.
actually have a character, like several female characters. There's Tess, there's Marlene, there's Ellie, and they're not like for the male fantasy as like what some gamers would like.
It's very
Say-
funny that you're wearing a cami shirt.
Yeah,
Kitty
Uh,
cat, though.
yeah.
You can't-
it's the kitty cat version of Cammy.
Who
yeah,
obviously is pandering to the male fantasy.
yeah. But one of the things that
That's my cat.
Last of Us did was instead of it being like, oh, okay, you're gonna play as a female who is wearing like scantily clad armor, who has like the big boobs and is like so completely like beautiful and is just mostly there for the male character's support as
Know
a love
yourself.
interest. There's not any of that in this game. This game is like they finally got a character from the female perspective of like, okay, I am going to play this character where it's not just like I'm like this hot female character. I'm going to be an actual person, an actual human being. And
Isn't it kind of sad that we have to highlight that as a?
I know,
good point.
and that's
They cracked the code.
it
They
is
made it well
no, but
developed.
it's really sad because like if you think about it, the games before, like I mean, Tomb Raider, for example, that was like
And it's realistic for the setting that it's in,
It
right?
is.
It's post-apocalyptic. Like, I could totally see a game where they still do those same things,
Yeah.
where a woman's...
Well, you probably have that several times.
oh yeah,
So it makes sense for this gameplay and this storyline.
yeah,
Yeah.
Right?
but yeah,
And you play as, well, gosh, I can't get too into spoilers. You play as
Tell me a
certain
little bit of
characters.
something.
I mean, like,
you can tell whatever you want.
I think you play
I
as,
see anti-spoiler.
yeah,
Tell me everything.
you play as female characters in part 2 that, along with Andy's point, aren't maybe, aren't meant to be, like, oval at all. And one of them is, like, particularly, like, strong and buff and is not, like, the damsel in distress at all. And another aspect of part 2, they both play pretty differently. Like, when you're playing as the stronger character, you feel different and you feel more of the... She feels stronger and like she can take down enemies quicker in a hand-to-hand. And yeah, so she plays a little differently.
And it pissed the gaming community off.
It did. It really did. But
I think
But it's
my argument for why I think part 1 is more approachable than part 2 is the story is a redemption arc. It is, and a lot of people, at the end of the day, like while they really do appreciate a good story, there's some people that just don't want to go and sit down and like actually just like really critically think about things. And I think The Last of Us Part 1 does a pretty good job of like tricking you in a way where it's like, okay, I'm going to play a story that's just, I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to take in the content and not think about it. But then what it does is it really tricks your mind into actually caring about these characters.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a balance to by the end of the story, when the ending happens, you're kind of like, I really want to know what happens next, but I also am very satisfied with the way that it ended because to me, I don't think there needs to be a part 2. The way that it ends is such a beautiful thing. I know you want spoilers.
So you're
but
saying part 2 is unnecessary?
Could it be a standalone?
part 2, in a lot of people's minds, was unnecessary, but
Is it that in your mind, Mucci? Do you have any?
But I played them back to back.
Yeah, but
So
because-
I didn't wait 7 years to play it, but
and that's
it makes a difference.
and for me, like again, that's why it's really hard for me to argue part 1 because I do like part 2 a lot more. But what I will say, for argument's sake, is part 1 is generally it's more approachable. There's a lot less complication in terms of like people, when they want to like play a game, they want to know that like who am I playing as the good guy and the bad guy, like and.
Yeah.
But I will say that like while technically part one, there's a moral question at the end of the game that brings up the ambiguity of like, is the main character a good guy or is he a bad guy?
Mhm.
It's still a very approachable game because the character, you're put into the mind of the character and you're given the reasons why the character made the choices that they made.
Mhm.
And that's why I think part one, a lot of people are more on board for in terms of part two.
Well, part two, I think you have even more complexity over like, is this character doing the right thing for both of the main characters you play as?
How much choice do you have in that, though?
You don't get any.
You don't. Yeah, I mean, It's the kind of there's this idea of like ludonarrative dissonance where like the game is like advocating nonviolence, but still because it's a game, you're killing a bunch of people. So like,
Games advocating nonviolence?
It is advocating for like, look at what your actions are doing. Look how destructive your actions are to people. So
It's kind of like an anti-war film in a way.
in a lot of ways, yeah. Because unlike the redemptive arc of the first game, the second one is very much a revenge story. And as you go on, you're starting to see the cost of that revenge is taking on both characters, the main characters, but like even the person doing the actions to get revenge, like how that's affecting that person. And you kill certain people that are important to the second character you play as, and when you play as that character, you start to see why they're important to that character. So it adds this like layer of like complexity in terms of is revenge worth it? Like dealing with trauma and PTSD.
So there's consequences for your actions, but rather than seeing them happen when you commit them, you see them from the victim's side.
Yes,
right.
And you do a little bit see them happen when you can commit them as well, because
like I said, people
you
calling out for their buddies.
With that, but even more like particularly whoever Alex is. I don't know if it probably is someone named Alex again, but a couple particular storytelling moments regarding characters and that you kill that are important to the second character you play as, who is the villain for that first half. And you see the person seeing how they went too far, and then you see also from when you play that other character who those people actually are. You get a backstory of this character that you just killed, without thinking.
So I think I've heard enough. If you have as well,
Yeah.
And
So you just close it out.
yeah, if you guys can give us kind of like one sentence, it can be a long sentence, but one sentence summarizing your position / shit talking the others, and vice versa. Then we might be ready to render a judgment.
Yeah, if you guys want to talk about the show in comparison in that one run-on sentence, that'd be great.
Take a minute if you need it. We'll put some filler here.
Little jazz music in between.
I would say
The Last of Us Part 1.
Last of Us Part 1, I think in terms of it being better than Part 2, is more of its approachability to the characters, the story. It doesn't... It
There's a
doesn't...
semicolon there.
Yeah. It doesn't cause you to... It doesn't cause too much complications in terms of like figuring out, who you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to be. It simply states like, you are these characters, this is a redemption arc, and you kind of explore that from there. I think in terms of the HBO show, the adaptation is really, really, really doing good. It's deviated a little bit, but from the deviations, it's only expanded more on the story. You have that Chernobyl writing where in some of at least the first 2 episodes, it talks about what was happening when the pandemic was happening and how the world was managing it as it was happening before everything fell loose. To the overall difference between how the cordyceps function and exploring the idea of like a fungal network, and and they're not being spores. Instead, it's tendrils, all that sort of stuff. But I think overall, the cast, even though they might be different races, they are their respective characters, and I think they do it wonderfully. Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey are literally Joel and Ellie, and nothing anyone says can change my mind.
All right.
Are you going to change his mind?
Well, no, because that doesn't really go against my point. But
So part 2, give us a
part
long
2, yes.
sentence.
Okay. I will say that I am very happy with the way that the adaptation has gone so far, because we know it's hard to make a great video game adaptation, and
Mark Wahlberg tried.
and
It didn't
Last-
do well.
for Uncharted,
Yeah.
Last of Us Part 1 is very conducive to being told in that format of a story that follows a pretty streamlined path from beginning to end. But Part 2, I think, is something I'm nervous about how they're going to adapt in the TV show, because I don't think it is at all possible to get the same effect that you do in the game as you do as you do in a TV show as you do in the game, because there's a lot of commas here and becauses and doing sense. But the playing as one character for like 10 hours and then switching and playing as another character, you're not gonna. I don't think you're gonna have 5 TV episodes following one character and then switch.
You
and you don't see that character.
You don't see a mid-season finale, and then you switch.
But I feel like it's a lot to probably ask an audience to watch like characters they're not familiar with for like now 7 episodes or something, like, because it just switched.
Maybe it's just they break it into 2 seasons.
Maybe,
Like they have a
but then you don't have the same effect as the game does, and that's why I'm saying the game is novel and unique because it has that approach that is unique to, I think, a video game.
Okay.
It plays upon the strengths of its medium.
In part 2 as a jump button.
And it's a jump button.
Okay.
Stupid.
Let's not forget the jump button.
It's like a judge just like confirming, like, and part 2 is a jump button, right? Yes, Judge.
So, I know where I land.
I think I know where I land as well. Do we want to converse?
I swear to God, if it's a jump button, I am objecting to that.
So,
Objection.
I'm happy to announce that there's a unanimous decision by the court.
Unanimous.
Unanimous.
Strongly.
What's that decision?
Part 2.
Part 2.
Part 2 gets it.
I would also like to add that, yes, part 2 is my favorite game of the series.
So this is like the place
Completely
Xbox
unanimous.
where we all like.
It is very
all like
much a
crazy.
unanimous thing.
It's a good game. It's got a jump button. They take some interesting turns with the medium of a video game in terms of storytelling.
I think it's really interesting that like you switch it up. You are playing as a character, and then you're playing like
The villain,
the
basically.
villain on the other side.
Yeah.
It's, that just
Cool perspective.
Yeah.
So,
I would like to see a Mario game where you're playing as Mario half the time, and then you get Bowser's
What
story.
was Bowser doing for these 3 days?
What's
leading up
he
to that?
doing? And why does he want Peach all the time? Maybe there's something
As
there.
Mario's going through getting revenge on the entire Mushroom Kingdom.
Sounds
How
like
does
you,
Bowser feel
he's
about
killing
this?
turtles, man.
He's killing his Koopas.
Sounds like you need to pitch that to Nintendo.
Yeah.
Hey,
I mean,
I've got some words for
technically,
Nintendo.
you play a game as Wario, and Wario is technically a villain. So
Yeah.
Okay.
there's that.
Waluigi.
Tennis.
Well-
You play against it. This,
All to the credit of how unique that perspective is in part 2.
so, Andy, sorry, your debut episode, you do not get a point.
That's okay. I'm all right with that.
Richie, you get some sort of point.
The Last of Us point 1. Yes. All
There
right,
you go.
we should just shut the fuck up. So I guess this has been a friendly debate.
On that note,
Yeah, on that note, it has certainly been
shut the
friendly.
fuck up.
Friendly
Thank
mini
you,
debate.
Mucci, Andy,
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
we and Derek for helping us out here, and Lando for making sure I don't make a fool out of myself.
Yeah.
Thanks
Catch
for
you next
listening.
time.
For watching. Yeah.